In this video, we're going to review the imperfect tense in Spanish, how it is formed, and when we use it. However, before we get to the Spanish, let's take a look at some examples in English so we can better understand when we need to use the imperfect. In these two sentences, the verbs are both in the English simple past tense. However, the meanings they convey are somewhat different. In the first sentence, the actions are definitely completed. Popcorn was eaten and TV was watched. However, in the second sentence, we're not sure whether the actions are completed or not. We're describing two concurrent actions in the past. We could rephrase this second sentence as the kids were eating popcorn whilst they were watching TV. When we describe ongoing actions in the past, we need to use the imperfect tense in Spanish. Put another way, if somebody was doing something or they were doing something, we need to use the imperfect. Here are two more sentences. Again, both sentences use the English simple past tense. I played piano last night. I played piano when I was younger. However, in the first example, I played piano last night, we're talking about a one-off completed event. In the second example, we're talking about something which used to happen, a repeated action in the past. We could rephrase this sentence as, I used to play piano when I was younger. Here are two more examples, again using the English simple past tense. Once again, the first sentence implies a single completed action. We went to the beach yesterday. However, the second sentence implies a repeated action in the past, something that we did several times. So if we're talking about a repeated action or something that we used to do, we need to use the imperfect in Spanish. To clarify when we need to use the imperfect, it might help to visualize a timeline, starting from the past on the left, moving up towards the present. Some actions are one-off completed actions. For example, I was born, we went to the beach last week, we watched the movie last night. These are single completed actions and can be visualized as a dot on a timeline. However, if we describe an ongoing action in the past and we're not concerned about when it finished, for example, I was watching TV last night, or if we're talking about something that used to happen or happened several times in the past, such as I used to play piano when I was younger, we can visualize these actions as lines in the past. This can be an unbroken line in the case of I was watching TV, or a dotted line, I used to play the piano. However, if we can visualize past tense actions as a line in the past, i.e. they are not completed, then we need to use the imperfect tense. So to summarize, if somebody was doing something in the past or we were doing something, or we're talking about a repeated action, something that we used to do, then we can visualize this as a line in the past and we need to use the imperfect. Finally, there's one more situation when we need to use the imperfect. If we're setting the scene or giving a description in the past, then we need to use the imperfect tense. In the final example here, the sun was shining, so we went to the beach. We've got two past tenses. The first one, the sun was shining, helps set the scene. Also, it tells us something was happening, so we need to use the imperfect tense. The second action, we went, is a completed action. We don't use the imperfect tense for completed actions. To summarize, the imperfect tense is used with a line in the past when we're talking about something that was happening or something that we were doing, or repeated actions, things that we used to do. It's also used for giving descriptions in the past or setting the scene. Now that we've covered when we use the imperfect, let's take a look at how it's formed in Spanish. For this, it will be useful to make two groups of verbs, AR verbs and ER and IR verbs. For AR verbs, we take off the AR infinitive ending and add aber. One way to remember this ending is to think that ABBA used to be famous in the 1970s. For ER and IR verbs, the ending is ia. You could remember this by thinking, I used to live here. Or, Van Gogh used to have more than one ear. Either way, that used to cue should remind you that that's one of the instances when we use the imperfect tense. Now to these two endings we can hook on S to give us the tú form, mos to give us the nosotros form, and en to give us the ellos, ellas, and ustedes forms of the verb. Let's take a look at some examples. Ella leía un libro y yo escuchaba música. She was reading a book, and I was listening to music. In this sentence, we've got two ongoing actions in the past, so we use the imperfect. Antes yo hacía mucho más deporte. Before, I used to do a lot more sport. Notice how in this sentence we use the subject pronoun yo because the first person singular and third person singular of the imperfect tense is identical. Another example of this would be, Él jugaba un videojuego mientras yo terminaba mis deberes. He was playing a video game whilst I was finishing my homework. Again, we've got two ongoing actions in the past. He was playing, I was finishing, and because the endings are identical, I've used the subject pronouns to distinguish who was playing and who was finishing. No salimos porque llovía. We didn't go out because it was raining. We've got two past tense verbs here, but only the second one is in the imperfect because that is describing what was happening. It is setting the scene in the past. It was raining. Llovía. Hacía buen tiempo, así que fueron a la playa. The weather was nice, so they went to the beach. Again, we've got two past tense verbs, but the first past tense verb is setting the scene. The weather was nice. Hacía buen tiempo, and that is why we use the imperfect. Fueron a la playa is a completed action in the past. We don't use the imperfect for completed actions. So to recap, for AR verbs we use aber, for ER and IR verbs we use ia, and we can hook on s, mos, and n to give us our other forms of the verb. The imperfect tense has only two irregular verbs. The first one is ir, to go, which changes to iba, I was going, or he or she was going. Unsurprisingly, ser is our next irregular verb. This changes to era, I was, he was, she was, or it was. Also, it's worth mentioning that ver is irregular in this tense as well. Instead of dropping the er ending, we'll just drop the r to give us veía, I was watching, he or she was watching. Again, we can add s, mos, and n to give us our other forms of the verb. Let's look at some examples. Alana siempre iba al colegio en autobús. Here, we're implying a repeated action in the past with siempre, so she always used to go to school by bus. Eran las 8 cuando mis padres llegaron. It was 8 o'clock when my parents arrived. Again, we've got two past tense verbs, but the first one, it was 8 o'clock, sets the scene. Yo veía la tele cuando Miguel me llamó. I was watching TV when Miguel called me. Again, we've got two past tense verbs, but the first one describes what I was doing when something else happened. The second verb is a completed action, and we don't use the imperfect for completed actions in the past. There are a few more things we need to be aware of when using the imperfect tense. First of all, there is always an accent in the nosotros form. Here are some examples. Esperábamos el autobús cuando. We were waiting for the bus when. Cenábamos cuando sonó el teléfono. We were eating dinner when the telephone rang. Again, the first past tense verb describes what was happening, an ongoing action in the past, and is therefore imperfect. The second one, the telephone rang, is a completed action. We don't use the imperfect tense for completed actions in the past. Next, to describe the existence of something in the past, we use the imperfect of haber, which is había. Había is invariable for singular or plural nouns. For example, había mucha gente en la estación. There were a lot of people in the station. Había mucho tráfico, así que llegamos tarde. Describing that there was a lot of traffic, so we arrived late. Notice how the first verb gives the description of what was there. The second verb is a completed action, and we don't use the imperfect for completed actions in the past. Había muchas cosas que ver. There were lots of things to see. Finally, whenever we use modal verbs in the past tense, verbs like want, to be able to ought, as well as mental processes, think, believe, and so on, we're effectively giving a description of a situation in the past, so we will normally use the imperfect tense with these kinds of verbs. Here are some examples. José no quería salir con nosotros. José didn't want to go out with us. Yo no podía salir tampoco porque tenía que estudiar. I couldn't go out either because I had to study. Mis padres estaban de acuerdo. My parents were in agreement. Pensábamos que era bastante barato, así que lo compramos. We thought that it was quite cheap, so we bought it. In all of these examples, we're describing situations in the past, and when we're describing in the past, we use the imperfect. So to summarize, the imperfect tense is used with a line in the past if something was happening or we were doing something, or repeated actions, things that we used to do. It's also used for descriptions in the past, including mental processes. For AR verbs, the ending is aber. For ER and IR verbs, the ending is ihr. We have our irregular verbs ir and ser, which change to iba and era, respectively. And to these, we can add our hooks of es, mos, and en to give us our other verb forms, remembering that we always have an accent on the nosotros form. I hope that you found this video useful in summarizing how we form the imperfect tense and when we use it. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. And thank you for watching.